Gresham College presents Debussy, Text and Ideas. Debussy and the Independent Art Bookshop by Denis Herlin.
Before introducing our speakers and the topic of our session, I want to thank warmly Helen Abbott and Richard Langan-Smith, who gave me the honor to chair this first part of a very rich symposium on Debussy, Text and Idea. Our first session, entitled Text Without Text, will be a good introduction for our main symposium focused on how Debussy used text in his composition, either visibly or subliminally. Our first contributor this morning, Denis Herlin, is director of research at the Institut de Recherche sur le Patrimoine Musical Français, and he's a distinguished historian of music and a specialist in Rameau and Debussy. He has been the general editor of the Œuvre complète de Claude Debussy since 2002, and he has published the complete correspondence of Debussy in 2005 with François Lezure. His paper today will focus on the unique artistic environment that was the Librairie de l'art indépendant, run by Edmond Bailly in Paris. Debussy frequented the place regularly, and Denis Herlin will help us understand how this special place, where poets, illustrators, and musicians gathered, influenced and enriched Debussy's response to text into his own art.
Thank you, Mylène. So I'm not going to give my lecture in Latin, but only in English, and that's enough for me. The building in the Rue de la Chaussée d'Antin at number 11 was long home to the small bookshop of the Librairie de l'art indépendant, the independent art bookshop. I quote, where the front windows offer passers-by a display of books, paintings, and engravings whose symbolism left no doubt as to the artistic tendencies of the establishment, end quote. Founded in 1889 by Edmond Bailly, the Librairie de l'art indépendant was no ordinary place, because one could find there books by such writers as Pierre Louÿs, Henry de Régnier, Paul Claudel, and André Gide, prints and etchings by Félicien Rops and Odilon Redon, and score by Claude Debussy and Ernest Chaussée, as well as publication dealing with the occult sciences. The proprietor of the establishment was sometimes reluctant to sell some of these works, as André Lebé humorously recalled. I quote, when a buyer asked him for Tel Mensonge by Henry de Régnier, of which he still had only a few copies, he stared at the fellow imperviously and picked up on the another counter, L'Homme tout nu, the Naked Man by Catulle Mendes, explaining that this dumbfounded but nonetheless agreeable client, sorry, I lost that the latter book would be for him a much better purchase. Tel Mensonge for a chap like that, he said to himself after closing the door on the poor fellow, end quote. From 1819 to 1895, Bailly was not content merely to be the most fashionable publisher for the young symbolist artists. He also offered them a place where they could assemble and converse at the end of a long day of work. I quote, we used to go to Bailly's place to talk about literature. Sometimes we would tell fortunes by placing our hands on a three-legged table and tapping out letters, end quote. One of the regulars at these curious reunions, Victor-Émile Michelet, recalled that Debussy came by almost every day and that, I quote, in the back room of the Art Indépendant, on a very good piano, he would play excerpts from music he had just written, end quote. In the obituary he wrote for Edmond Bailly, Jacques Brieux traced in several pages the life and career of the former publisher, who was born in Lyon on 19 June 1815 and who died in Paris 18 September 1916. Bailly, a name he invented, was in reality Henri Edmond Limet, who had first studying to become a musician. Although we have no documentary evidence of his admission to the Paris Conservatoire, this practitioner of the occult sciences, before becoming a publisher, was an active participant in the musical life of the time. He published several pieces for piano of a classical mode, notably a mazur in F major, yes, here we are, opus 10, and a danse d'autrefois, opus 7. Editor-in-chief of La Musique Populaire in the 1890s, a weekly illustrated magazine devoted to the theater, the fine arts, and literature, he became, after 1888, a contributor to, and later, the director of La Musique des Familles. His writing well reflects his capricious nature. For example, to the magazine L'Hermitage, he submitted a study of the different ways in which the poet Villiers de l'Isle-Adam was connected to music as both performer and amateur composer, and more generally of the role of the music in his writings. In another article, Bailly delivers himself of a detailed analysis of the tonic sonic word that takes us from the harmony of the spheres to the voices of nature. His intellectual curiosity and his appetite for literature, the occult and the arts, especially music, made of him the very incarnation of a symbolist. In one of his letters, Debussy underlies precisely this point, I quote, "If only you knew how well this little fellow's eyes tremendous knowledge and highly artistic ideas. His intransigence is furthermore sometimes so strong that my own is reduced to nil," end quote. It is difficult to find information of the beginnings of Bailly's career as a publisher. It is likely that he became gradually interested in publishing as the result of his work for various magazines. That he chose to set up shop at number 11 in the Rue de la Chaussée was not by chance, for that had been the address since 3rd November 1887 of La Revue Indépendante. Yes, here we are. Which also maintained a shop that specializes in books and modern paintings, rare and unusual works, literary novelties, and publication of the review. When that monthly magazine abandoned the local in January 1889, Bailly decided to invest in the place and to carry on La Revue Indépendante in his own particular way. By choosing to call his bookshop and publishing house L'Art Indépendant, he quite deliberately announced his heritage. Furthermore, the geographic location of this building offers interesting possibilities, as Jacques Brieux explained. I quote, "Bailly's publishing house was located at number 11 in the Rue de la Chaussée d'Antin. The courtyard in the back also served as the courtyard for the building at the number 14 in the Rue Halévy. Bailly was thus able to take advantage of two addresses and two entrances. On the Rue de la Chaussée d'Antin side, the business was called Librairie de l'Art Indépendant. On the Rue Halévy side, it was called Comptoir d'édition. The Comptoir d'édition, estampes, livres, musique, sold, published and printed edition and also published new ones. Things changed in 1890 when the Comptoir d'édition brought out the collection of Fantaisies, Pamphlets et Souvenirs by Villiers de l'Isle-Adam entitled Chez les Passants, whose appearance exemplified the artistic qualities of the edition now to be brought out by the Librairie de l'Art Indépendant. The cover and the title page of Chez les Passants bear an ornamental frame by Félicien Rops that is dated 1876. Within the overall border, we see, I quote, "a wild, a female sphinx with long pointed fangs and strange and fantastical wings, who seems to have been ejected by the waters upon the banks of an unknown river," end quote. We see the left side of her body and as she kneels a look at us as though in shock. This vignette called Poisson Rare, with at the bottom the motto Non hic piscis omnium, this fish is not for everyone, as you can see, will become the emblem and symbol of the Librairie of l'Art Indépendant. It was Rops' homage to the publisher Auguste Poulet-Malassis, who used this motto Non hic piscis omnium on the cover of many poems he published, and for example, Les Fleurs du Mal. By suggesting that Bailly used Poisson Rare as a symbol of his bookshop and publishing house, Rops no doubt took him for some kind of Poulet-Malassis redivivus. In June 1896, the magazine La Plume published the etching of Poisson Rare, accompanied by a text attributed to a certain Jacques Pontory, but in fact the work of Robs himself. The poem, in a language entirely untranslatable that attempts to evoke the aura of old French, is a description of the iniquitous charm of the Robsian Sphinx, who arrived from a strange and foreign land at the issue of Satan and some female creature of the sea, who directs strange melody at the rising moon, sings in tongues from beyond the grave, and attracts young men from their grotto, and sucks their blood and vital fluids until death itself ensues. The young men in question are opposed in the text, in the poem, to, I quote, les gens très doctes et bons physiciens, wise men and good doctors, les ménestrels et les tailleurs de belles images, minstrels and creators of beautiful images, les savants, intellectuals, and les devins, spiritualists, the only ones who can hear them without being killed. This appellation, appropriately descriptive of the public for the Librairie indépendant, suggests that Bailly himself had a hand in the drafting of the verses. In addition to operating the Comptoir d'édition, Bailly began his own publishing business, the Librairie indépendant, by bringing out 8 works in 1819 alone. Among them are found books about theosophy, about instrument making, as on display at the 1889 World's Fair, about Louis XVII, and about esoteric Buddhism. Other features such young symbolist writers as Paul Claudel, Pierre Louÿs, and Henry de Régnier, their very first publication. He also brought out Mallarmé's lecture on Videlli-Ladan in an edition of 50 copies on luxurious unbound paper. Louÿs, La gloire du verbe, and Régnier, Poèmes anciens et romanesques, were printed in small quantity on either Holland paper or on Japan. Rocks, enigmatically female sphinx or sibyl or prophetess, also it will not make its appearance on front cover and title page until 1891, is here discreetly included by the publisher's imprint and on the back cover. The edition of Paul Claudel Tel d'Or has no interior title page, no pagination, and no mentions the author's name. The title is only mentioned on the outside grey cover. In the year that followed and up to 1894, the number of titles issued by the Librairie indépendant continued to grow, from 13 in 1891 to 24 in 1894. Serious literature occupied the most prominent place, with esoteric tracts relegated to a secondary status. Claudel offered another anonymous publication with his prose drama, La Ville, while Henry de Régnier contributed to more collection of poems, tels Mensonges in 1992 and Arrêtus in 1895, as well as a collection of short stories, Conte à soi-même, in 1893. These young authors were joined by their friends, including André Gide, 6 of whose books were brought out by Bailly, among them Le Traité du Narcisse, Les Cahiers d'André Walter, Le Voyage du Rien, illustrated by Maurice Denis in 1893, and Palude in 1895, and Pierre Louÿs, 8 of whose works saw publication here. Among them is Opus 1, Astarté in 1892, La Maison sur le Ligne in 1894, dedicated to Claude Debussy, and the famous Chanson de Bilitis in 1895, of which Debussy set 3 texts in music in 1897, 1898. Also yielding to the charm of the Robsian Sphinx were André Fontenas, Paul Faure, André Ferdinand Hérol, a close friend of Debussy, Albert Mockel, Jean Tinan, a friend of Debussy too, and Oscar Wilde, who offered to Bailly the French version of his Salomé in 1893, after the text has been revised by Pierre Louÿs. To thank his lesser-known collaborator, Wilde dedicated the volume to his ami Pierre Louÿs. Thus, in the space of only a few years, Bailly, I quote, the little-birded little fellow with gold-rimmed glasses, I quote, has succeeded in publishing the very best writers of his generation. Had it not been for financial loss, it could have become the Alphonse Lemaire of the Symbolist. Various witnesses confirmed that Bailly worried little about sales. He rather wished primarily to publish works impregnated with the strongest possible symbolist aesthetics, taking great pains with typography, most notably by allowing for wide margins, by varying the formats in accordance with the text, by printing covers that were, I quote, unified, of vivid colors, something that at the time was a singular novelty, or of a parchment finished with titles in blue gold, such as that Le Portrait du Ciel by Jules Bois. You see that very special format, published in 1894. These volumes were intended for only those considered worthy of them and appeared in small print runs. Bailly loved refined papers, tinted vellum and Japan, China, and one-man stock. Finally, not content simply to put their works on display, he commissioned frontispieces from Félicien Rops and Odilon Redon in order to enhance his publication. Thus did Odilon Redon provide a frontispiece representing a woman in profile for André Ferdinand Réroll, Chevalerie Sentimentale, in 1893. As for Félicien Rops, after creating in 1891 the frontispiece for Villiers-l'Isle-Adam chez les Passants, he sketches two more, the first for Jean de Thinan, un document sur l'impuissance d'aimer in 1894, and the second for Henry Détouche, Propos d'un peintre in 1895, which was accompanied by a prefacing by Rops himself. But by his editorial masterpiece, however, was surely his commission of 30 lithographs from Maurice Denis for André Gide, Le Voyage du Rien, in 1893, a highly elegant volume issued in a print run of 300 on English filigree paper. Denis also designed the lovely cover for Debussy's La Damoiselle and Élue, the Blessed Damoiselle, in 1893. Indeed, the heart of music, so important to Bailly, made its entry in his catalogue in that very year of 1893 in the form of a musical frontispiece or prologue by Vincent d'Indy for the poem of Karl Boès, Opale, in 1893. The following year, Bailly twice renewed this experiment, first with a novel by Thinan, which has also an autographed manuscript page by Augustin Holmès, and secondly, with the esoteric play by Jules Bois. I show you the cover of La Porte héroïque du Ciel, published in 1894, which featured two mysterious designs by Antoine de la Rochefoucauld and a prelude by Eris Satie, Prelude à la Porte héroïque, included in the books. And it is without bar lines, as you can see. I propose to listen to just the beginning of this prelude. But it was the publication of Debussy La Damoiselle élue in July 1893 that marked the true beginning of the musical engagement of Librairie indépendant. It is not known precisely when Debussy began to frequent the Librairie of l'Art indépendant, but it is highly likely that he was familiar with the room at number 11 in the Rue de la Chaussée d'Antin as early as 1890. In fact, in the first letter we have from Debussy to Pierre Louÿs from March 1892, the composer replies to the young poet, who was hoping to obtain a copy of his 5 poems of de Charles Baudelaire, that he would find 2 copies at Bailly's establishment in the Rue de la Chaussée d'Antin, where they had been on sale for some time. These melodies, written between December 1887 and 1889, were published by subscription in a print run of 150 copies, of which 50 were printed on a long paper, with no indication of the name or city of the publisher. Nonetheless, the aesthetic qualities of the volume clearly resemble those of the other publication of the Librairie indépendant. Large format, cover in faux parchment, title is in blue and gold and brown, wide margins and widely spaced printing, with blank sheets introduced in such a way that each melody begins on the recto side of a new, odd-numbered page. All in all, an edition that provided the very aesthetic qualities that Debussy would insist upon throughout his lifetime. In a letter to Jacques Durand, his friend and sole publisher after 1905, Debussy remarked virulently on the subject of especially engraved printings on Holland paper of his 2 books of preludes. I quote, "As I looked at the copy of the prelude that you were very kind enough to send to me, and that demonstrates your excellent taste, I wonder why the use of fine quality paper is almost exclusively reserved for literature. This is exceedingly unjust. What lovely blacks, my dear friend! The music here takes on the look of a print made for the pleasure of both the art and the eyes, if I may employ that somewhat antiquated expression." End quote. It is unnecessary to point out that all of these editorial choices were opposite to those made by music publishers at the end of the 19th century, when saving money was the only thing that counted, regardless of the celebrity of the composer. The diffusion of the 5 poems of Charles Baudelaire now led by and Debussy more seriously to contemplate a series of musical publications under the aegis of the Librairie of the l'Art indépendant, of which the first would be the voice and piano score of La Damoiselle élue, brought out in July 1893 with a cover sketched by Maurice Denis. Published in a print run of 160 copies, 4 on China paper, 8 on Whitman, 8 on Imperial Japan, 15 on Holland, and the rest on white vellum, this tiny oratorio with a touch of mysticism and a whiff of paganism on a pre-Raphaelite text by Dante Gabriel Rossetti could not help but seduce by. First performed in an orchestral version on 8 April 1893 at the Société Nationale de Musique, La Damoiselle élue marked the beginning of the friendship of Chaussée and Debussy. The cover illustrated the beginning of the poetic text. The blessed Damoiselle leaned out from the gold bar of heaven. Her blue-grey eyes were deeper much than a deep water even. She had 3 lilies in her hand, and the stars in her hair were 7. I propose just to read a small extract of the beginning of La Damoiselle élue, the blessed Damoiselle. The idea of illustrating the first Librairie indépendant edition of the work with a lithograph by Maurice Denis probably came from Henry de Régnier or from his brother-in-law, Ernest Chaussée. Charmed by the young artist's illustration for Gide, Le Voyage du Rien, and both good friends of the composer, Régnier and Chaussée had supported Denis at the beginning of his career by making purchases and major commissions for their homes in Paris. Be it as it may, Debussy appreciated Debussy lithograph, and in July 1893, when the composer sent a copy of the score to Denis, he ornamented it with an expression of appreciation in green pencil. I quote, "With profound thanks to Maurice Denis for having kindly agreed to decorate in a rare and precious manner la Damoiselle élue. May he accept our joint gratitude, Claude Debussy, July 93. Unquote. The subscription launch of this occasion and likely financial aid of Ernest Chaussée contributed to the success of the publication. I quote, "But he must be radiant," Chaussée wrote to Debussy, "and with reason. From the bibliophile's point of view, this is the loveliest book he has ever published, along with Le Voyage du Rien." End quote. Opposite the title page, one finds mention of two works by Debussy scheduled to appear from the Librairie de l'Art indépendant, Prélude, Interlude et paraphrase finale pour l'après-midi d'un faune, and Premier cahier de prose lyrique. In the event, neither of these two works was published by the Librairie de l'Art indépendant. The second item that appeared in Bailly's series was rather Ernest Chaussée concert in D major for piano, violin, and string quartet, opus 21. At the bottom of each page of the score is found the plate number AI2, that is Art Indépendant number 2. Debussy played no small role in the preparation of the concert, printed in January 1894, notably in the choice of the cover, format and title page, as he notes on a letter to Chaussée on 5th February 1894, I quote, "I'm very happy that your edition of the concert," he wrote, "I'm very happy that you like the edition of the concert," he wrote, "but he seems to me to want to take the lion's share of the credit for his success." If the cover, yellow with a cream-colored frame surrounding the title Ernest Chaussée Concert, and on the verso side an iris, is less original than that of La Damoiselle élue, it is nevertheless rather unusual because of its non-traditional format, a large in quarto, which recalls the format with large margin of score from the 18th century. Finally, opposite the title page, we see the announcement of a work by Chaussée soon to appear, Poème de l'amour et la mer. And I just only want to listen a small extract of this concert, Sicilienne. After the publication of Chaussée's concert, the collection was augmented by two small works of Bailly himself. The first, plate number AI3, is a musical setting of Mallarmé's apparition. The songs, marked by a certain romanticism, is hardly revolutionary. We do not know if Debussy played a role in the composition of this work, but he was clearly not indifferent to the choice of the poem. Some 10 years earlier, in February 1884, he had made a setting of the very same poem, which was remained unpublished throughout his lifetime. Bailly's own sixth fascicle carries a lithograph by Philippe Charles Blache, no doubt commissioned by the author. Blache presented Mallarmé with a yellow-brown proof on a Japan paper marked with an envoy, I quote, "to the author of Pages. This homage in the form of a song from a poor and unimportant child," end quote. In precarious circumstances, Blache had received financial assistance from Mallarmé. Debussy had likewise urged a friend, the painter Henry de Régnier, to convince his brother-in-law, Ernest Chaussée, to buy a painting from Blache. Bailly's second composition, entitled Trois Rondelles de Charles d'Orléans, avec musique opus 9, was apparently published in the same year with the plate number AI4. Of limited musical interest, this publication yet again attracted Debussy's attention. In April 1898, the composer of Pelléas set 2 poems by Charles d'Orléans for the amateur chorale of the Fontaine family, which he directed. Then in 1904, he took 2 rondels by the same poet, which he included in the Trois Chansons de France, a collection of songs for voice and piano. From the end of 1893, Bailly was faced with increasing financial difficulties, as we learn from a letter that Chaussée himself wrote to Debussy, I quote, "Obviously, Bailly is more worthy of assistance than anyone because he is an improbable publisher who only puts out things that are of high qualities and that please him. It is thus hardly surprising that his business affairs are not going well," end quote. Despite various schemes of financial support, Bailly was constrained to slow the rhythm of his publication, as thus to witness the desertion of the author. I quote, "Unfortunately, Bailly was a poor businessman. Most of the writers whom he published slowly but surely moved away from his publishing house. Looking elsewhere, some went over to the Mercure de France, which, not yet a serious journal, soon became the beneficiary of the authors formerly associated with the Librairie de l'art indépendant," end quote. As for Debussy and Chaussée, they too deserted the boutique in the Rue de la Chaussée d'Antin. The former confided his prose lyric and Prélude à Privé d'un Faune to Georges Hartmann, who had them published by Fremont. The latter gave his poem De l'amour et de la mer to the publisher Émile Baudoux. Despite his debts, however, Bailly was able to avoid bankruptcy essentially by giving up literature and music and devoting himself to theosophy and the occult sciences. Various recollections of the Librairie de l'art indépendant demonstrate the degree to which an entire generation was fascinated by this boutique. Debussy clearly enjoyed the liberty and intellectual nourishment that he found during afternoons in the Rue de la Chaussée d'Antin. By way of songs, he offered to Bailly the autograph of the voice and piano score of La Damoiselle élue with a revealing dedication. This manuscript is offered to Bailly in remembrance of so many 5 to 7 o'clocks, which were and will always be precious for me for reason of aesthetics and sincere friendship. May 93, end quote. Constantly in search of new literature and new horizons, Debussy had there been able not only to converse with the erudite Bailly, but also to have discussion about poetry with Henry de Régnier, who had of course proofread the free verse of the first 2 prose lyrics published by the musician in the Entretien politique et littéraire, a magazine that published Le Librairie l'art indépendant at the beginning. And Debussy had of course thought about setting to music is some completely novel form, some of Régnier's Scène of Crépuscule, published by Bailly in the collection of poems anciens et romanesques in March 1890. Debussy has also enjoyed a number of conversations with Harold, Gide, and Paul Claudel, and especially Pierre Louÿs, with whom he would share a very close friendship from October 1893 through 1904. Finally, he also appreciated some of the charcoal drawing of Odilon Redon when Bailly organized regular exhibitions, most notably in the spring of 1893, when the composer was reading the proof of La Damoiselle élue. One of the Redon drawings represented the Masque of the Red Death, one of the Histoire extraordinaire of Edgar Allan Poe, translated by Baudelaire and Mallarmé, among others. Debussy admired the tale of Poe throughout his lifetime, and long contemplated opera of the Devil on the Belfry and the Fall of the House of Usher. Another of the Redon drawing represented the head of Orpheus drifting on the water, and it was also in Chaussée collection, a myth that fascinated Debussy and that led him to ask the poet Victor Segalen to prepare a text on it that the composer might set to music. We also know that the celebrated painting La Cellule d'Or, also called Le Profil Bleu, was on deposit at the Bailly's shop in December 1892 before being sent to Durand-Ruel in November 1894. Finally, Debussy had received as a gift of work probably a lithograph from Odilon Redon, who had been so enthusiastic after hearing the first performance of La Damoiselle élue at the Société Nationale de Musique in 1893. I quote, "I cannot tell you how indelibly my remembrance of your La Damoiselle élue has marked me," Debussy wrote to him 20 April 1893. It is and it will always be as precious to me as your artistic understanding, end quote. And in July 1893, when Debussy sent to him the copy of La Damoiselle élue to which he had subscribed, the composer carefully inscribed a dedication, I quote, for that rare artist Odilon Redon, this music that was fortunate enough to afford him some pleasure, end quote. I was not able to find a poster of the exhibition of 1893. I find only 1896, and it has been designed by Armand Rassenfos. Felt a convergence of the arts in that unique location that was by his establishment in the Rue de la Chaussée d'Antin could not help but profoundly nourish Debussy's work as composer. In 1893, 1 month after the appearance of La Damoiselle élue, Debussy began to draft Pelléas and Mélisande. The atmosphere of the work that became Debussy's operatic masterpiece was perfumed with the air of the Librairie, indépendant. Thank you very much.
For more information, please visit www.gresham.ac.uk.